Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to discuss the multiple issues that have now presented themselves to us here in the Senate and to the United States Congress and, frankly, the American people. I've been in several hearings this morning. The first was with Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew, where the Finance Committee discussed with him the pending expiration of our debt ceiling and what his understanding is of how that will impact the country. He raised a lot of serious concerns, very legitimate serious concerns that others are raising. We then followed that up with a hearing in the Banking Committee, where we had representatives from a number of the various industries in the United States also discussing what is going to happen in the United States if the country does not increase the debt ceiling. And there are serious consequences that will happen if we don't do this. But what I tried to do in both of those hearings, and I'll refer to my conversation with Secretary Lew, was to focus us back on the broader, bigger threat. Secretary Lew basically said that we have a manufactured crisis here in the United States because of our unwillingness at this point to face the debt ceiling and simply extend the debt ceiling without any kinds of conditions or negotiations. And I reminded him that the crisis we face is, the big crisis we face is the debt crisis. And it's very real. And I guess, in a sense, it has been manufactured over the last 20 or 30 years by Congresses and presidents who have refused to control spending and have put us into tremendous debt. Our debt ceiling that we are negotiating about right now, or I think wishing we could negotiate about right now, is $16.7 trillion. It's grown by trillions of dollars over the last 5 or 6 years. And what the President has asked us to do is to once again increase the debt ceiling by another $1 trillion or more with no reforms, no fiscal changes in our policies to deal with the mounting spending crisis that we face. The President's position is, you give me this $1 trillion or more of new debt authority, and I will then talk to you about reforming our fiscal policy. The problem is that we've been trying to negotiate over fiscal policy now and trying to get reforms put into place for years, and we have not been able to get there. When I asked Secretary Lew about this, he basically said, you know, we've made progress on our overall debt crisis in the past few years, and I think that we can continue to work on those kinds of steps if you will simply pass this clean debt ceiling and do so in a way that involves no negotiations from the President in any way. I reminded him that a major part of the progress that we have made in the last couple of years was made when we met the debt ceiling 2 years ago, in 2011. And it was the Budget Control Act that put into statute over $2 trillion of reductions in our spending path, and that was attached to the debt ceiling as we moved forward. And it was literally a debt ceiling negotiation that generated the only significant spending controls that this Congress, that this country has seen for years and years. And yet the President refuses to take another step, now that we've met the debt ceiling again, and negotiate for further reforms. Well, and by the way, there is another reason that we've made some progress in the past few years, and that is that we have implemented massive new taxes on the American people. The Obamacare legislation itself contains nearly $1 trillion of new taxes, and they are now, though they were delayed for a few years, they are now beginning to fully hit the American people. And last January, the President was able to win his argument and succeed in getting the top income tax brackets raised. An impact on our tax code that I think was harmful rather than helpful, and clearly was damaging to the creation of jobs and to businesses across the United States. But nevertheless, another $500 to $600 billion of tax revenue was put into the mix there. So what have we done? We've made a plan to control discretionary spending over the next 10 years and reduce it by about $2 trillion. If we stick to that, we'll get $2 trillion worth of spending reductions. We've raised taxes by at least $1.6 trillion over the next 10 years, all of which I believe has been harmful to our economy, but has generated revenue to try to help reduce the debt cycle. But we have not addressed the two critical parts of reform that we must address in this country if we are ever to get control of our spending excesses and stop the out-of-control spiraling toward insolvency that we see. And that is reforming our entitlement system and reforming our broken tax code. What have we seen there? Virtually minimal, if any at all, reforms of entitlements. They seem to be off the table. Yet they are the part of our spending problem that is the biggest and the most out of control. And on tax reform, we've seen no reform of the tax code. We have a tax code that is the most unfair, the most complicated, the most expensive to comply with, and the most anti-competitive code we probably could have created if we did it on purpose. And yet we have no reforms of the code, and instead what we have done is add to the code another $1.6 trillion of new taxes on the American people. And what we are asking is whether we can move forward in trying to deal with our fiscal problems in this country by negotiating over entitlement reform and tax reform. And I frankly believe that we ought to be at the negotiating table talking about that. But what we've been told is, no, as soon as you will raise the debt ceiling by, and the amount that we are hearing is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion, as soon as you will raise the debt ceiling, then we can talk further about other negotiations. Then we can get engaged on trying to deal with our debt crisis. I pointed out, as I said, to Secretary Lew that the last major progress we made on spending reform happened in negotiations relating to our debt ceiling. Why can't we negotiate now and make significant fiscal reform in addition to dealing with our debt ceiling? It's that debt crisis that is the biggest problem. I was on the Bowles-Simpson Commission, the President's own commission that he put together some years back, 2 or 3 years now. And we spent a full year studying the impacts on our economy of America's fiscal excesses and what we needed to do. And the Bowles-Simpson Commission came up with a plan. It was a proposal. We concluded that we needed to, and this was 2 or 3 years back, but we needed to reduce our spending path, our debt path in the United States by at least $4 trillion. We concluded that we had to deal with that by reforming our entitlement system, and we had to deal with it by controlling discretionary spending, and we agreed to having some of that tax revenue that the President was demanding. And we also agreed that in the overall mix that we would have about a 3-to-1 ratio of revenue to spending, of spending cuts to revenue. The President did not accept that recommendation. And many of us tried for months and months and months afterward to get that recommendation to the floor for a vote. But it has not made it to the floor for a vote. My point is, negotiations have been underway for years and years, and significant plans have been developed that would help us move forward. We know what to do. We need to have the will to do it. And so far, the only reforms that we've been able to get in the last few years as a result of the debt crisis that we face have come when we've met these pressure points dealing with our debt ceiling. We're not asking to shut down the government for the purposes of simply making a point. We are trying to get to negotiations. We want to see the government reopened. We are not seeking to have the debt ceiling expire. We want to have negotiations to be able to put together the kinds of fiscal reforms that should always accompany extensions of the debt ceiling. I believe the reason that Congress put statutory debt ceilings in place in the first place was because they wanted to give America a gut check every so often about the spending problems that we have. We've put almost half of the entire spending system of the government on autopilot, and we don't even have the opportunities to vote on it here in Congress. Madam President, ultimately, we have to deal with the debt ceiling, and ultimately, we have to deal with the funding to keep our government operational. Let's not just move forward and accomplish those objectives, leaving in place the unrestrained fiscal crisis that we are dealing with in this country. Let's use this opportunity to put together the kinds of fiscal reforms that should accompany decisions to allow our country to increase its debt. And with that, Madam President, I yield my time.